I warmly welcome you to our beautiful Polish embassy here in Paris, a place as exceptional as the one where the meeting of 30 leaders, prime ministers, prime ministeresses, presidents of EU countries, as well as NATO allies outside the Union took place. So, at the invitation of President Macron, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Prime Minister of Norway, the Vice President of Turkey, the leader of Iceland also came. We talked about the situation in Ukraine, of course, and what Europe, what countries that want a stable, reliable peace in Ukraine can do here and now for such safe solutions. And of course, the topic is not only the situation in Ukraine, but for obvious reasons also, the security of the entire continent, including the security of Poland. I must say that this meeting was already a very positive summary of the changes that have taken place in Europe in recent years, and especially in recent months. All of them, without exception, presented the same position: the position towards Russian aggression, the position towards the need to help Ukraine in its defense, in its confrontation with aggressive Russia, the same position when it comes to sanctions against Russia, the same position when it comes to the necessary effort on our part to maintain the best possible relations with the United States, even if circumstances are not always favorable. But we are all aware that the North Atlantic Alliance, Europe, we are all safer when this cooperation with the United States is at the highest possible level. The cooperation of these countries, which met today in Paris, will also consist in finding solutions that are not always typical, for example, or to extend sanctions against Russia, and we probably can't count on Budapest here. You know the whole story. So among other things, I raised the need to look for ways, methods that will allow for a common European policy towards Russia, even if Hungary is not interested in it. All the leaders speaking today were characterized by such exceptionally visible and common sense, pragmatism, but also determination. I think I can say without modesty that the view that I expressed on behalf of all of us in Poland, that Europe has changed, and that this is perhaps one of the most important effects of this war, is that Europe has lost all illusions about Russia. Europe stopped being naive. Europe began to believe in the need to build its own strength. Europe understood that the best guarantee of peace for Poland, for Europe, for Ukraine, of course, will be our strength, our determination, and such solidarity action. Here I must also say that this unanimity was, although it had been expected for a long time, really surprising. Its level, its intensity, so to speak, also at the level of emotions, arguments. I must say that I had the feeling that today we really constitute a community on this issue, on the issue of security, support for Ukraine, and attitude towards Russia. We talked about various forms of assistance. I have already mentioned this many times. No one expects Poland to prove in any additional way its commitment to the security of Europe and to helping Ukraine. I received with great satisfaction the words of President Macron, who, without any urging from me, said what we have been talking about for a long time. That is, help for Ukraine, i.e. sending troops to Ukraine to stabilize the peace, guard, ceasefire, etc. It cannot in any way weaken the defensive capabilities of the eastern flank, i.e. our border, the border of Litva, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, with Russia and Belarus. Translating this into such human language, Poland will very effectively support all actions for peace, stabilization, and a just resolution of this war. Above all, when we effectively defend our border and the entire eastern border of NATO and the European Union. Everyone finally understood this. We will really be able to help Ukraine, And above all, we will really be able to stop Russia from taking further aggressive steps if Russia and the whole world see that our eastern border is well guarded, and that Europe, not only Poland, it is not just about our efforts, that all of Europe is also investing its capabilities, money in the defense of our eastern border. This is another step, and I would say another stage. Fortunately, the time is now behind us when we had to constantly convince our partners to understand that the border with Belarus and Russia is also their security. Today, it is already an element of the European doctrine, and this means that we will be able to focus on specific, practical actions for the security of Poland and our border. I also had the opportunity to talk to President Macron about our bilateral relations between Poland and France during the meeting in Storocha. We are slowly finalizing the treaty between Poland and France. I hope that we will soon be ready to sign this treaty. In a sense, with relief that our Polish position is accepted in its entirety as part of this European and NATO vision of peace and security. There is no reason for any enthusiasm or joy because we know how difficult the situation is, how critical the situation is in connection with Russia's aggression and with the geopolitical changes that we are witnessing. This geopolitical instability, of course, is a fact. All the more reason to appreciate that in these difficult conditions, Europe and most NATO countries are trying to effectively stabilize this geopolitical situation. And Poland is really playing one of the key roles in this. Thank you very much, and please ask questions.
President Donald Trump has decided to introduce 25% tariffs from April on vehicles imported to the United States. How do you assess this decision, Mr. Prime Minister, and will it affect the Polish economy? Did the leaders discuss this topic on the sidelines of this meeting?
We did not talk specifically about customs today, because that was not what today's meeting was about. But of course, the customs policy of the United States, the Trump administration, is a constant topic of discussion for obvious reasons. This is not the first decision or announcement of a decision, because as we know, sometimes it changes. These ominous-sounding announcements are not always implemented. But this is not the first such situation, and it is known that it will have an impact on the European economy. There is no doubt about it. We may not be directly affected by such tariffs. We are not car manufacturers on a scale that would have any significance, but we are subcontractors of many factories and plants located in Europe. So it can definitely have an impact on their condition. Unfortunately, I have no influence on the decision. No one has any influence on President Trump's decision regarding his customs policy. As you have noticed, it can be surprising and sometimes gives the impression of being spontaneous. But we certainly have no influence on these decisions, so we must effectively ensure that Europe reacts as solidarily as possible and without nerves. So everyone is slowly understanding that Europe cannot be on its knees before anyone for obvious reasons, that you have to value yourself, you have to believe in your own strengths. But since on the other side of the Atlantic, we so often hear statements indicating a lack of sympathy for Europe, well, to put it mildly, then one conclusion follows from this, that it is Europe that must take responsibility for ensuring that these transatlantic relations survive. If today some politicians on the other side of the Atlantic question the sense of close relations between the United States and Europe, then our reaction should be such action that will allow us to survive this dramatic period. And because for us, the issue of good transatlantic relations is strategic, and they must survive more than one term, more than one prime minister, president on both sides of the Atlantic. That is why we will certainly act in such a common sense, calm way, but certainly not on our knees.
Is there already a slightly more lasting peace? And I would also like to ask about your comment on these American-Russian over Europe's head talks on Nord Stream. Lavrov said very clearly that it would be nice for Europe to use Russian gas again. Did they also touch on this subject here?
Today's meeting was not aimed at making any joint decisions regarding possible stabilization missions in Ukraine. They are an obvious part of this future plan. But for now, there is no point in specifying these plans until there are at least preliminary results of American-Russian talks on a real ceasefire. We rather talked about how to convince our American friends that today it is already clear that Putin is not interested in a ceasefire. President Zelensky and Ukraine showed maximum goodwill during these talks in the Saudi army and agreed unconditionally to a ceasefire. It was the Russians who started to set conditions, including completely unrealistic conditions. For example, an unrealistic condition from the point of view of all those gathered here in Paris today is the Russian condition that they agree to a ceasefire on condition that all sanctions are lifted. We know what Putin is playing at, and here I must emphasize once again, fortunately, here in Europe, no one has any illusions. No one has any doubts. The task of those who are in contact with President Trump is to convince the Americans to open their eyes as wide as possible and to see who is responsible for the fact that this war is still going on. Who is responsible for the constant deaths? Who is responsible for the bombings and attacks on Odessa, on Kiev? For us, it is completely obvious. It is already clear that England, Great Britain, France, some other countries would be ready to create such a mission in Ukraine to maintain peace. But first, this peace must become a fact, so that is why no one is talking about the details yet. As I mentioned, no one doubts the obvious need for Poland to take care of its eastern border and the European Union's. So I often talk about this with our Ukrainian friends, with the NATO Secretary General. We also talked about this yesterday. We know our tasks. They are directly related to the security of our border, but also to organizing this aid for Rzeszów, the airport in Asia. This is the largest hub. 90% of all aid goes through our border crossing. So we have something to do. And that is why, let's not return to the topic of the possible presence of Polish troops in Ukraine, because we made the decision a long time ago. There will be no Polish military mission in Ukraine. We will help Ukraine and all of Europe in the same way we have been doing so far. Let's say rumors, signals, because there are certainly unofficial statements that perhaps the Americans and Russians are thinking about how to launch Nord Stream so that Europe can buy gas again. This time it would be Russian-American. But I'm saying that I don't know of any official decisions. I just share your concern that such rumors may only be spurred on by the Russian side. But such rumors appear from time to time, and they have nothing to do with Europe's strategy, which is based on actions that are to make us fully independent from energy supplies from Russia and Europe, which is thinking about strengthening sanctions, not about resuming economic relations with Russia, because these sanctions really work. We have no doubts about what President Zelensky said, that if Europe continues to act as it has done so far, they will be able to defend themselves effectively throughout the year. And it is not certain that Russia will survive this year, in terms of the state of the Russian economy, precisely because of the sanctions. It may sound brutal, but that is what this game is about. It is not our choice. So Washington will certainly receive the information that Europe is not interested in such actions if, I repeat, if these rumors have anything to do with the truth, because we do not know that.
Mr. Prime Minister, I wanted to return to the issue of the asylum regulation because here the government emphasizes the temporary nature of this solution, 60 days for now. Well, but it follows from the announcements that the situation on the border will still not be good. So isn't this just a formality, extending it for another period? And the second question in this context, because President Andrzej Duda signed this act, just as you appealed for it, he also addressed you with a letter in which he asks about border protection, Polish immigration policy. Do you plan to answer? Excuse me, may I add, Szymon Łuczyk from the Weekly Powszechny. I wanted to add a question to the current issue of the Asylum Act. Namely, non-governmental organizations in Poland protested against this act, as the Prime Minister knows. And the question is, they draw attention to the violation of human rights and the harassment of non-governmental organizations by Poland. Unfortunately, also the border guard. So the question is this, a simple one for you, but as a person, not just a politician. Is helping people in extreme need who are often dying a crime?
The regulation, in accordance with the Act, may limit or temporarily suspend the right to apply for asylum for 60 days. Later, it will have to be extended. It will also require a parliamentary decision. We will extend them as long as needed. The situation at the border, I have never questioned or commented on the actions of all those who do it out of the goodness of their hearts, because I have no doubt that most of those involved at the border also do it out of the goodness of their hearts, or at least I hope so. He does what is right and moral in their anger. But I am the Prime Minister of the Polish government, not an activist of non-governmental organizations. I am responsible for the security of the Polish border. There really is no such thing. We didn't want to, excite anyone. But we would have a cool recording of how the Belarusian services would plant so-called migrants in such a nice white van exactly at the place of our press conference, to perhaps lead to some other provocation. This is not the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. This is not a situation of poor migrants who are treated badly by the Polish side. The situation on the Polish-Belarusian border is an organized sabotage action by Moscow and Minsk aimed directly at the security of Poland and Europe and consists of organizing illegal border crossings, which is also associated with physical risk on our border. And we will be here, regardless of the comments, we will act here ruthlessly, and we will protect the border from anyone who wants to cross it illegally. And I will not comment on this anymore. Whether someone likes it or not, that's how it will be. I'm done with this topic. I think I have answered your question comprehensively, and all the arguments are clear here. I don't think I need to prove anything. I am talking about a situation that is very uncomfortable for me. I am talking to people. I listened so patiently to your question, even though the minister did not foresee the continuation. Yes, we were about to finish, but I will ask the Prime Minister, because there was a question from the Polish press agency about a possible answer for the President. I try to strictly follow this custom, that when I am abroad in the company or in connection with the international situation, I do not comment on what is happening on the Polish political scene. I cannot say anything good about what the President has been doing lately, and also about his letter and questions, so I will not comment on that. How much is that? 138? Did I count today? For me, that's the only answer I can come up with at the moment. There are 131 days left, and we'll manage somehow. And on that optimistic note, we end. Thank you very much. See you soon.